As a novice in teaching, I know education in Australia is tied to our country's recognition journey. For Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, education was formerly a tool of conciliation and cultural eradication. Now education needs to change to become a vehicle for justice, inclusion, and truth-telling. In this presentation, I will provide an overview of how I plan to promote reconciliation through pedagogy, embedding Indigenous perspectives throughout the curriculum, employing culturally responsive pedagogical approach, and responding to AITSL focus areas 1.4, 2.4, and 4.4. My stance considers conciliation as a moral and professional commitment to equity and respect in everyday practice in classroom, not merely a symbolic idea. Education systems have traditionally situated Indigenous students within deficit ideology, considering failure a cultural threat instead of attending to the systemic exclusion responsible. In fact, school curricula still too often privilege Western knowledge while Indigenous perspectives are regarded as an add-on. Reconciliation counters this imbalance by reinventing education as a shared space of respect and truth-telling. Under AITSL 1.4, teachers need to implement strategies which respond to cultural identities of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. AITSL 2.4 extends this responsibility for all teachers to work toward reconciliation between Indigenous Australians and non-Indigenous Australians through culturally inclusive practice. In short, reconciliation in education is not about adding Indigenous content. It is about transforming the value and relationship that define how we teach and learn. For educators to truly support reconciliation, they must use a critical and reflexive pedagogical practice. Critical pedagogy encourages us to think about schooling as a process that reproduces power hierarchies, while reflexive is the ongoing consideration of one's own cultural position and biases. Here, self-awareness allows us to transform intention into ethical actions. Evans emphasized the importance of relation pedagogy, that is, when working with, and not just about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. Working with this community establish trust and build a relationship in which Indigenous voice must take a lead role in determining what we teach and how we teach it. Through relational pedagogy, but more importantly, flexible practice, reconciliation can become part of our everyday decision-making in the classroom. What knowledge we privilege, what story we share, and who we give precedence to as a knower. This three-classroom strategy implements the process of reconciliation into practice daily. Youngling Circle is a way to create connective dialogue and safety through shared trust. Everyone, including the teacher, has equal participation, which demonstrates Indigenous knowledge of communication. It also creates a sense of emotional safety, fundamental for students' well-being. Place-based education grounds teaching in the country in which the school is situated, with the involvement of local elders and an awareness of the living importance of the land. Students learn to see country as a teacher in its own right. This approach is an implementation of AITSL 2.4, contributing a reconciliation through respecting and building relationships. Indigenous story work involves oral histories and storytelling, centering Indigenous voice. Story disrupt conversation of deficit while building empathy and responsibility. It fosters ethical knowledge share, where teachers listen, not speak for. Connectively, those approaches go further than symbolic gesture. They embed recognition through relationships, emotional care, and transformation of the curriculum. Reconciliation will require a commitment towards unlearning and learning and courage. Teachers are expected to operate with a complex professional environment which includes limited time and resources, assuming risk of mistakes and some systemic oppression, while also establishing their position with dignity and openness. Meeting the AITSL standards of 1.4, 2.4, and 4.4 every day goes beyond simply meeting standards. Teachers are demonstrating a commitment to justice, respect, and care. When students' identities and cultures are acknowledged and represented in the learning process, students learn that they are part of the teaching and learning experience, which promotes feeling of safety and belonging. Through acknowledging Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's right to collaborate through a process of reconciliation, teachers are obligated to close the gap in educational outcomes and well-being. In the end, reconciliation is no longer another thing to do. It's become a commitment to ethical and inclusive teaching practice.